Hi, I'm Kevin Magnussen and these are my pro tips. The best way to learn a new track, I find it's a little different depending on what kind of track it is. I've tried a couple of times where I go to a track and it's actually a newly built track, so that is a bigger challenge, and I think the first thing of course is to know which way it goes. It's very basic and simple, but actually knowing the layout of the track and having that as a very memorized part is of course number one. Next step is to get some reference points. First one is break points. Try and find some structure on the track that lets you know where to brake, or at least a reference for the brake point. And that can be difficult. That's where you go and do a track walk, or if there is a track model in a simulator, then you can learn it in that. Next step after that is of course to try and find out the technique of each corner. Some corners require like a V style. Other corners you have to kind of do a more, you could call it a U style, as opposed to V style, where you don't sort of attack the entry so much of the corner, but more sort of back off a little bit on the entry and then carry minimum speed. And that varies a lot depending on what type of corner it is and what the grip is and the banking in the corners, and a lot of different variables that go into that. And that's where I think the simulator really is a necessary part of that. It's not super easy to kind of guess your way by just looking at the track or walking the track. It's something that you need to actually get some driving to decide or to find out. So that's where the simulators really come into play. One of the things I try to do is look at videos from the past and see if I can find some trends. Some corners or some tracks you'd want to be on the outside in the first corner. If it's going, let's say Barcelona as an example, turn one is a right-hand corner, but then directly after is a left-hand corner, which then leads into this long right-hand corner. So there it's important to try and decide beforehand which side is the best one. But those are things that are preferences. Some people might like the inside line in turn one in Barcelona, but it depends on just at least what you like to do, and if you want to attack or if you want to be more defending or safe if you want. There's some risk with going on the outside too. So I think it's just important to kind of run through these scenarios so that you've kind of mentally been through it. So if you do end up on the outside and you're planning on being on the inside, then you know how to go about it, what the risks are, and this, kind of the trends if you want to be in each scenario. The secret to a good start, I would say, is luck a little bit. But there's things that you can do to set yourself up for a better start. But I would say, the start, in my mind, is also through the first corners. One thing is getting away from the start slot in the fastest way possible. Of course, that's very important. There's a whole other element to that in terms of getting the clutch point right and the revs and temperatures in the tires and stuff like that. But I would say that the thing that is more important is getting through the first couple of corners. It's very different on the first lap because all the cars are so close together. And with Formula 1 cars especially, you have a lot less grip when you're on the first lap, because at least if you're starting in the middle of the field, because there's a lot of cars around making this turbulent air. So everyone is very careful but still trying to push because the grip is so low. It's very easy to lock up a tire or anything like that. So you always try and predict what the car in front of you is doing. It's important to try and look ahead of that car and not just look at the car in front of you, because if you just look at him, then you can react to what he's doing. But if you can look ahead of him, then you can kind of predict what the car in front of you, directly in front, is going to do, because you can see what he will have to react to. So I just think it's a little bit similar to driving on your own. Looking ahead, looking further ahead is important, because you will just be a little bit further ahead in time, and you can react to some things a little earlier, and that way kind of get on the right line in terms of attacking the guy in front of you. So yeah, look ahead and try and see what the guy directly ahead of you has to react to. The kind of setup I prefer is a difficult question. I prefer a stable rear of the car on entry, so I like to be able to be a bit more aggressive on entry with the car, and that requires a bit more grip or a bit more rear balance from my car versus maybe other drivers. The way I prefer my pedals to be set up is actually to have them a little bit far away from me. I don't like having my knees bent too much, and also I feel like I just have more power with my leg almost stretched out completely. So I guess most of my force comes from my foot or my ankle rather than my hip and knee. The setup of the car varies quite a bit. You try to keep the characteristics of the car, so the feeling of the car, as similar as possible every time, so you don't want to have to learn to drive the car each track you get to. Of course, you set the car up very differently in Monaco than in Monza. It's two very, very different characters of track. But it also depends on the bumpiness of the track. With Formula 1 cars at least, you try and get them as low as possible. And if the track is bumpy, then you have to race it up. And racing the car up just removes downforce from the underneath the car. So it's always a compromise. You're never able to set the car up perfectly because there's different variables that force you to go outside of that perfect window of the car setup. So if I have a specific problem on a track, in a specific corner, let's say I'm behind in high-speed corners, then I need to go and find a way to improve. Sometimes you have a reference point in your teammate, for example, who's driving the same car, and if he's quicker in high-speed corners, let's say, just to take an example, then you need to try and find out how you are going to improve that. And again, it comes back to setup in the car. If you want to try and help the setup or the balance in the car to suit you better, or if you want to just try and sort it out yourself and work with your driving to try and find that lack of speed, you have to always think that if you go and change the setup to help in a high-speed corner, for example, then it's going to have an effect in other places too. So if you're very happy in all the other corners, then you've got to try and evaluate whether you think it's worth it to risk that good balance in all those corners to help in whatever corner you're lacking in. So most of the time, I would say, if it's just one corner that you're struggling with, it's highly likely to be a driving issue and not a car issue if all the other corners are good. So where you're looking is actually a very important part of driving. Of course, I think most people know that it's good to look further ahead. Because you're driving so fast, it's better to lift your view and look further ahead, because it's actually coming to you so quickly when you drive a race car. But there's also techniques of looking. Of course, we have brake points. So for example, you're getting to a corner, you need to hit your brake mark. But you don't need to look at the brake mark. You can actually aim for your brake mark, but once you kind of got it, then you can start lift your vision into the apex, and you can still kind of see the brake point. So that way you're just a little bit ahead. You're already adjusted and in a way already ahead of yourself, because your eyes are set on the apex, but your brain is focused on that brake mark. So in that way, you can get a small advantage, I would say, if you can get used to driving like that. That's somewhere that simulators are good too, because it of course can be a little bit daunting or difficult to start practicing this in real life. To not look at your brake point can be a little scary, I guess, in the beginning. So do practice that in the sim first. See you next time for more pro tips.